Welcome, and strap in, because today we're going to be talking about race. Is it a biological or social concept? Before we jump into the video, we're going to be talking about some troubling and potentially harmful topics. If you need to stop the video at any point, please do so. So, race, biological or social? The answer may differ depending on who you ask. Let's start from the beginning. We begin in Europe in the late 1600s in a period known as the Enlightenment era. During this time, European powers were very interested in the spice trade centered in Asia and much of India, and the money involved with it. However, there were steep tariffs for the transportation of these spices from the makers themselves. So to eliminate the middleman and to save on money, Europeans embarked on a mission to find a more direct route to India. So why is this important? Well, this is the first time Europeans are seeing people who look very different from themselves, and in true human fashion, we decided that we needed a way to categorize these new people. Enter Carl Linnaeus. Linnaeus pioneered the current taxonomic naming system that we use for all plants and animals, such as Homo sapiens, which are humans, us, or Bombus terrestris, which are bumblebees. In his book, Systema Naturae, Linnaeus identified 4 distinct categories of humans: Americanus, Europaeus, Asiaticus, and Africanus. Not only did Linnaeus state these categories, but he primarily focused on the observable characteristics of race, ascribing his 4 named categories specific characteristics. He described Europaeus, European whites, as being the kindest, smartest, and wisest, and Africanus as being lazy, fat, and sly. Another prominent scientific racist was Samuel G. Morton, who rose to notoriety in the 1800s. Morton took ethnic classification and subsequent racism to a whole new biological level. Morton believed that he could make a ranking of the races based on brain size. To test his hypothesis, he would pour a lead shot into the crania of differing races to determine the cranial capacity. His results indicated whites as having the highest capacity, Native Americans as having the second highest capacity, and Africans as having the lowest. Take these skulls, for example. Can you tell which is white and which is African American? I can't. Even within the races, Morton established a hierarchy. For the white race, Anglo-Saxons were on the top, Jews were in the middle, and Hindus were on the bottom. These findings insinuated that there were intellectually inferior and superior races, which have real implications for modern-day racism. It implies race is a biological reality, and this scientific argument acts as the primary line of justification for a lot of racism. Another aspect of history that perpetuated historical racism and furthered the idea of racial differences were human zoos. Human zoos were a very popular attraction in the late 1800s and early 1900s in America, where zoos would kidnap people from Africa and other non-white countries and display these cages filled with people to their white visitors. They were advertised as the missing link between humans and monkeys, which, while we know today is completely untrue, was a founding principle of much of anthropology. Now, delving into one of the darker parts of United States medical history, the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. These experiments were orchestrated by the US government and were designed to study the progression of syphilis in black men, as they believed black people were more susceptible to STIs. The first group of men, aged 25 to 60, were infected in 1932 under the guise of receiving free medical care for bad blood. In reality, they were being infected with syphilis, and over 600 men would be infected over the next 40 years, being incentivized to join the study with various benefits like free medical care and money for their families. In the early years of the study, the doctors who were part of it treated any women or children who contracted syphilis, but these medications often included high levels of mercury and arsenic. However, as time progressed, the benefits that were offered to be a part of the study started falling through as the community began to realize the organizers weren't actually treating them. Some men went to outside clinics for treatment, but the organizers began sending out lists to local clinics of people not to treat, costing them their lives. When the community began to realize what was happening to them, they started avoiding doctors altogether, and meanwhile, syphilis was still running rampant throughout the community. By 1947, penicillin was the standard treatment for syphilis, and the researchers did their best to prevent the men from being treated. About 30% of the men in the study did manage to be treated, but the rest were prevented from being treated, and as time went on, they came up with more and more excuses to keep the men from receiving treatment. The study finally ended in 1972 when a whistleblower leaked the story to the press. Now, the reasoning behind the study was based on the belief that black people were more susceptible to STIs, which is obviously false. The doctors behind the experiment called it a study in nature and based it on the idea of race as a biological concept and therefore having biological differences in how different races react to different diseases. This idea of race as being something biological was based on pseudosciences like craniometrics, introduced by Morton, that were popular in the 19th century. Unfortunately, staying in a depressing corner of racist medical history, we'll look at the story of Henrietta Lacks, a black woman whose cells led to groundbreaking scientific discoveries, but unfortunately as a product of scientific racism. Henrietta Lacks originally sought treatment at Johns Hopkins in 1951 for cervical cancer, which she would pass away from the same year. During her stay, she, without her consent and unknowingly, had her cancer cells stolen from her and used in various kinds of cell research, as they could survive and reproduce basically for forever. These cells were dubbed the HeLa cells, and are the underlines of much of modern medicine, making huge contributions to the fields of immunology, cancer research, and infectious diseases. Most recently, they were used in the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. Even though her cells provided the groundwork for many discoveries that have saved the lives of millions, the fundamental fact that they were stolen from her without her consent is abhorrent. Henrietta sought care at one of the few hospitals of the time willing to treat black people, and they used her. Neither she nor her family ever saw any of the profits from the research, nor received any of the credit. Over the years, researchers have continuously failed to ask her family for permission to publish her name or medical records, directly violating HIPAA laws. Since the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, there's been a big push to recognize her contributions to medical science and to right the wrongs committed against her by pushing for more regulation of the use of specimens and giving profits to her descendants. The living Lacks descendants of today are continuously working to preserve her legacy and making her story known. Check out part 2 to learn more about how everything we've discussed in today's video is impacting modern-day conceptions of race and racism.